Remember, it's your America, and that's why we're here. We're going to talk about all kinds of things, and we're going to talk about an author I have standing by here, and his name is Eric J. Earhart, and he has a book, and you'll find it very interesting. And before we move on with that, and we're going to do an intro of that book, and we'll be right back in just a second, and we'll move on with the interview. So, again, welcome to the show. And so, before we get further, tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're a pastor of a church. Can you give us? I'll let you give your own intro.
Sure, yeah. Ricky, thanks so much for having me on. What a blessing it is to be with you guys tonight and your audience. As you said, my name is Eric Earhart. I was born in Dixie General Hospital in October 1967, there on the Chesapeake Bay. I was born into a commercial fishing family, fourth generation commercial fisherman. My dad at that time was actually a Newport News police officer, and he had taken a break from fishing after he got out of the Army in 1966, and he went on the Newport News Police Department for a couple of years. So I grew up in a policeman's home there in Suffolk, Virginia. Then he went back on the fishing boats. That was kind of the family business. So growing up really in a rough and tumble world with a manly man as a dad, kind of drill sergeant environment, and it was a different world back then, Ricky. We were a lot of freedom. We kids get on our bikes and we run the streets, and our family began to have some difficulties growing up. And my dad broke his back on a fishing boat, and our welfare system, and I hope we can get into some of the politics of the day during this interview and this time. But the welfare system in the United States is designed to tear families apart, not keep them together. And even at that time, it was 1972, 73, my dad broke his back, and he was self-employed as a commercial fisherman. And my mom went down to try to get some assistance, some food stamps, something for these 3 kids she had in the house. And she was told at the time that the only way she could get assistance, because she had a man in the house, a husband, was that if she would lie and say that he had abandoned her and her and the kids. So I remember my dad was in the Portsmouth Naval Hospital because he was a veteran, and they were taking care of him, even though he didn't have regular insurance, self-employed. And she drove up there, she took that document, and all of us kids tagging along. And I remember very clearly, I don't know if you've ever been to the old Portsmouth Naval Hospital, big, beautiful marble building, front steps. And I remember going up there and going to see my dad, and she brings this form in and says, she said, "Charlie, they won't give us any help for kids if I don't say that you've abandoned us." And I remember my dad saying, "You'll never ever tell anybody that I've abandoned you and my children, because I'll never do it." And when he died, he died 20 years ago of cancer, and he had checked himself out of the VA hospital in Hampton as he was dying. I got a call one day. I was in a Hosky, North Carolina, associate pastor there, and I get a call that my dad is ripping all of the devices. He was, all the plugs and all the things out of him. And so I jump in my car, and that's a hour and 15-minute ride there to the Hampton VA there. I rush there as quick as I can. I get there. The staff are trying to calm him down. And I was like, "Dad, what's going on?" And he said, "I promised your mother 40 years ago when she married me that I would take care of her the rest of her life." And he said, "I got to get back to work." So we checked him out of the hospital. He was in bad shape. He was gonna die within weeks of that. but he checked himself out of the hospital, went back to work for one day. The ambulance had to come get him and take him back to the VA, and he died a few weeks later. But that was the kind of the home I grew up in. And so we had no help, and he was out of work for a long time with a broken back. And so I started stealing food. We had no electricity and no water in the home. And I started stealing food at 11 years old. And I went from stealing food to stealing beer and selling it to men, grown men there to, around the beach where I grew up. And anyway, so it was a rough and tumble world. And so I found myself in survival mode for the next probably 10 or 15 years, really trying to get my feet under me. And, I learned the wrong lessons of life, Ricky. And I really thought that it was dog eat dog and that I was going to make sure that I survived. And so that's kind of how things started. And I had a big giant wake up call. I'm sure we'll get into it with the book, but that was my upbringing. And good people, workaday people, blue collar fishermen. They drink hard, they fight hard, and they work hard, and that's what I grew up with. Yes, sir.
Well, yeah, it definitely, and full disclosure, I read your book. I actually bought two of them when I was there, and I bought one for me, and I bought one for somebody else that I know would be very interested in it. I found it very, very interesting, and it was definitely a good read. It just, it kind of talks about the things that sometimes people just don't want to talk about.
Right.
I think I think just transparency is the key to anything that we do. Full speed ahead, transparent. Some people don't like that; they'd rather hide in the shadows. But I think what I took from the book was just transparency to everything that goes on, and how we approach things in life do matter. So, but yeah, so that was like I said, I'd recommend it to anybody else that wants to read something like that. And talk about what would you say that if you had to underline the overall meaning of the book, what would you tell somebody defines the book?
Well, I can the underlying meaning of the book, and I appreciate that question because that really sets the stage for me. Thank you. So it's a duality, and I would say one is spiritual, for sure. The reason I can be transparent is because of God, and because I experienced the grace of God, and I no longer have to hide in shadows. And I don't throw stones at people. I know a lot of people that have messed up in their lives and have a past. Most of us, all of us have a past. And most people don't want anybody to know about that past because they try to do better and they try to go on with their lives, right, Ricky? So, and I get that, and I don't throw any stones at anybody that's not going around telling people how bad their past was. They just want to go on with their life. I appreciate that. So, but because of the grace of God in my life, it's kind of a testimony that I have to share. I have to tell people so that other people can hear that you can come from humble beginnings or broken beginnings, and your life can still turn out okay, right? Kind of the American dream. So one aspect of the underlying message is this spiritual message of the grace of God displayed in Jesus Christ for all who will come and receive forgiveness. That the word gospel means good news, and so it is good news for people like me. The other underlying message is that there's 22 million Americans out here just like me, people who messed up, who made a mistake, who came up in rough circumstances, whatever the case is, and now they're trying to go on with their lives, right? They're trying to get the pieces back together and go on with their lives. And the system of government effectually keeps people like me in slavery for the rest of our lives. I call it that there's a place for restitution and redemption. And in our society, we've actually gone backwards, believe it or not. Like, I'll give you an example here in North Carolina. Up until 1977, and what I'm about to describe to your listeners, Ricky, is all of these are kind of the effects on the war on drugs. When we change from a nation freedom, individual liberty, and we began to become this police state in so many ways. So people today look at what the FBI does, the CIA does, the ATF does, and they look what they do to freedom-loving Americans, and they're shocked. They think, how
Right.
in the world could this be happening? But what they don't understand is many of the regulations and policies, many of the police state powers that they operate under were unleashed under this thing called the war on drugs that started in the 1970s. Really, in 1960, Control Act of 1968, called the National Firearms Act of 1968. Anyway, so in 1977, in North Carolina, was really the first federal firearms license or felony firearms license, felony firearms laws that were implemented. Traditionally, if a man had served his time, paid his debt, so the old thinking was, and that if you did the crime, you did the time. But once you did the time, you were expected to get out, go back to your community, and try to be an upstanding citizen and get on with your life, right? And so that began to erode under the war on drugs. And so in 1977, the North Carolina legislature debated on what they should do because the federal government was using money and pressure. They always use highway dollars, law enforcement dollars, school dollars to pressure states to change their laws, and usually laws to take away freedom from Americans, not maintain freedoms. So North Carolina was being pressured to bring its felony law system in line with the federal. And so North Carolina instituted its Felony Firearms Act, GS 1415. And at that time, the state legislator did not believe that they had the right to take away rights of a citizen. They just didn't think, they thought if you did your time, after you did your time and you got out, your rights were restored. So the first thing they did was the incremental. This is how they do incremental. And the reason I'm focusing on the felony firearms laws, a lot of people ask me, well, why don't you focus on things like voting or these other infringements? Because the reality is there's no other right that's listed in an amendment that's so clearly defined as a right that's been stripped away. The right to defend yourself and defend your family, right? And so in 1977, the North Carolina state legislature passed this law that said that if you had committed a felony, that after you finished your time, you done your time or your restitution, after you had paid your debts, whatever the case may be, that your rights were restored, except for you could no longer have a handgun in public. You could only have one on your place of residence or on your place of business that you owned, right? So, and in that debate, they really struggled with whether they had the right to take away a right, the General Assembly, right? So what they came to the conclusion was, and this will tie in with what's going on in America today. So our General Assembly did not believe that they had the right to take away your right to a long gun. They believed that the Second Amendment protected even a felon's right to own a long gun to defend himself, his family, and his home, right? So what they did was said, well, they'll nuance this and we'll just make it where you can't have a handgun in public, but you still can have one on your personal property or on your own business, right? You fast forward to 1995, and then they amended that to now say no handguns. Then you fast forward to 99, and then they amend it and say, well, no guns at all. And see, so this 20-year snapshot is exactly what we've been seeing in the United States, right? Is this eroding of the rights of the individual, and the state just assuming that it has the right to do this with really no recourse. And so in 1999, it was challenged. The state was challenged because they made this retroactive to anyone who had committed a crime and paid their debt, even if your crime was 40 years before, it didn't matter. They made these laws retroactive, that now a felon couldn't own a firearm at all in North Carolina. They could only have a muzzle loader, black powder, right? So they made this retroactive, basically a double jeopardy. So now you got people who had paid their debt years before, decades before, where all of a sudden the firearms they could own to protect their home, to hunt, to do whatever. Also now they're committing a felony by owning something that just the day before was legal, right? And so when the ATF wrote a letter to the North Carolina Secretary of State at the time in '99, asking them under what regulation or law that they derived that power to do that, they simply said that in their opinion they have that right. So that kind of in a nutshell tells you what's been going on with people in America, is that our government just continuously erodes our individual rights, takes them away, and then their answer to that is, in our opinion, we have the right to do this, right? And so that's kind of the deal. There's 22 million people like me that have paid their debt and they want to get on with their life, and their rights have been eroded in the name of a lot of things, and we'll get into talk about what I will classify as conservative criminal justice reform.
So let me ask you. So let me ask
Go
you a
ahead.
quick question. The attorney generals always love to give their opinions,
Mhm.
whether they're law or not. The attorney generals
Right.
love opinions, and they're proud of their opinions.
Yes.
Um, and I've read opinions, and I'm thinking, well, it's kind of like me and you. We all have opinions. That don't mean it needs to be law. And I think as we have challenges that come forth. So who's ever challenged that part of the law in North Carolina?
Well, the biggest challenge was by a gentleman named Barney V. Britt. Um,
Right.
Mr. Britt challenged the law because he had committed a felony 20 some years before and 23 years before, paid his debt, finished his time. Now, and we I need to kind of lay this case. Most people hear the term felon or felony and they think of rape, robbery, murder. They forget about the other 247 things you can do to
Right.
get convicted of a felony in North Carolina, let alone the United States. People don't realize that you can have too many. You can turn in too many tin cans in Illinois, and it's a felony. But anyway, Mr. Britt had served his time 23 years before, paid his debt, and went on with his life. And according to the law, he purchased firearms and would hunt and had guns to protect his home, never committed another crime, never did anything wrong, went on with his
Mhm.
life. And then this new law made him a felon for exercising the rights that his rights. Anyway, so he took all those weapons, removed them from his home, gave them to a family member to comply with the law, and then he challenged the state. He sued the state for a double jeopardy, and the Supreme Court, North Carolina Supreme Court, ruled in his favor. But they kind of chickened out, and this is what they said. They said we are ruling only in the case of Mr. Britt, and not in the case of all felons who have had their rights restored previously. This is a narrow decision only in his case, that's crazy. If it's unconstitutional to retroactively take away Mr. Britt's rights, it's unconstitutional to take away anybody's rights. Anyway, so they ruled in his favor, and now piece by piece, over the years, different people like me have used the Britt decision to go back and try to get their rights restored. And they have this five criteria process they use but the reality is, and as simple as this, Ricky, when you paid for your house, when you paid for your car, and you made that last note payment to the bank, the
Mhm.
bank doesn't come back the next month after you paid that thing off and say, well, wait a minute, you owe us some more. And you're going to owe us some more for the rest of your life. When you paid your debt, you paid your debt. And if I
Mhm.
owe you some more, you let me know what it is. But if I've already paid it, then I don't owe you anything
Right.
else. I'm clean. And so that was kind of the case. And they ruled narrowly for this one man. But that has been the chink that's been used over and over in North Carolina.
So
Uh,
each case now they want you to challenge it and take it to court, or
yes, you have to. Yes.
so
So
they don't have any formality of having hearings, or just got to take it to court.
yeah, you got to
So
take it to court, which I did 3 times and had my rights restored. Same thing. It's like, so do you remember the movie Gladiator, Russell Crowe? Man, what
yeah.
a great movie. So in that movie, because this is kind of this is where our felony law comes from. It comes out of Roman slave law. So in this movie, Maximus gets branded a slave. And as long as he's in the Roman Empire with this brand, he's not a citizen and he has no rights of citizenship. And so the only way back to citizenship in Rome at that time was you either had to bribe your way back, you had to pay for it. And we have cases of that in the Bible where centurions talk about buying their citizenship. And then the other way was through the gladiatorial games, that you would fight your way back, and then Caesar would confer upon you your rights again. And we basically had that system here now. And the precedent is the Supreme Court case where we had the Supreme Court decide that even if you had been a slave, if you were an African descent, if you even had one drop of African blood, that even if you were free, had been freed with a D, you were never free. You were never a citizen. And so what we've done is created that same situation where people like me, look, in 25 years since I got caught with that cocaine over 25, 26 years ago, I've not even had a speeding ticket. Right. And it took me years, decades, and lawyers and judges and fighting and paying and to get my rights restored. 26 years, right? And for no reason other than you either going to bribe your way back, you've got a politician in your pocket and you can bribe your way back, or you're going to have to fight in some gladiatorial game where Caesar finally gives you your rights restored, right? And that's the kind of system we have set up.
Yeah, it's definitely, when you look at some of the crimes, the totality of the crime, the nature of the crime.
Yes.
Not every felony is a death penalty case. Not every felony is something that needs to be hung out.
Right?
Yeah, it's like So it's like the second chance law, and all that stuff.
Sure.
If they're going to give people a second chance and a better way to do things so they can establish themselves, they need to look at the broad spectrum of everything that it affects. Kind of like it's like a web. One thing suggests one thing to the next thing. And the web shouldn't be there to restrict you, but to make you stronger once you achieve a certain level of freedom that you regained.
Well, a couple of things that you really just provoked my thought there. So number one, I'm a believer in law enforcement. Told you my dad was a cop. Right. I served in the United States Army. I believe you do the crime, do the time. It's as simple as that, right? Now we have to, with a caveat to that, Ricky, is that not all laws are just. Like the government makes laws that are not just. We know people sitting in jail right now who exercised their freedom to protest in January 6th, and they're still sitting in jail, right? So not all laws are just, and we need to recognize that. But if you break the law, if you do the crime, you should do the time. And the reality, though, is once you've done the time, what do we do with you then? And this is where I believe the conservative movement has been kind of missing it. So I get it that as conservatives, we really hammer down on law and order. We really hammer against crime. But the polling data from this midterm election is important. So I watched a couple of exit polls, more than a couple. I watched several. I'm a junkie like the rest of you guys. So I watched some exit polling. It was quite interesting what they were finding out. Is that moderates and independents were saying that they agreed with the Republicans that crime was out of control and things were run amok, but that the Republicans were not offering any solutions. So they weren't willing to replace what they had with someone who didn't have a plan to go forward. And so when I ran for Congress in the 3rd Congressional District here in North Carolina, I was running on one of the planks of my platform was conservative criminal justice reform. And because I really don't look, 70% of Republicans and conservatives identify as Christian. So we are the people of redemption. So there should be restitution and redemption. If you've done the crime, do the time. You need to bring restitution to the society. You need to pay your debt to society. But once you've done that, now we need to look at redemption. Why, so I'll give you an example, and this really shook me up. And Thomas, good to see you, brother.
Continue, sir.
One of the things back, I don't know if you guys remember this, but it was an off-year election in Virginia for the governor. They do even in between
Hmm.
the midterms. So Northam did a little sneaky peeky at the time, and he instantly, by executive order, gave all the felons in Virginia the right to vote. He restored their civil rights, not their
Mhm.
firearms rights, their civil rights, right? Which is kind of silly because the Second Amendment is the only one that's identified, and how am I supposed to protect my home and family? But anyway, so he restores, thinking that these people are going to vote for the Democrats, right? So exit polling at the time, though, showed, and it makes sense once you realize it. So once you realize that about 80 some percent of felons are men, and 77% of men vote conservative, the exit polling they did showed that most of the felons, and not many of them did, it was a very small percentage of felons in Virginia took advantage of it and voted. Right there, you go, Youngkin. Um, that when they did the exit polling in that, Ricky, they found out that like 70% of the felons who took advantage of Northam's move
Mhm.
voted for conservative candidates, right? And the Democrats freaked out, and you never heard anything about giving felons the right to vote again, right? Because
Yeah.
the conservatives were missing something here. If you
Mhm.
remember, the very name penitentiary comes from the idea of being penitent, right? And it was the Quakers of Pennsylvania designed the modern prison system that we use in America. And the
Yep.
idea was that you no longer got put in stocks, you didn't get beat and whipped, but you were put somewhere where you could think about what you had done and you could be penitent. You could offer repentance and restitution and come back out into society trying to get your life together. So I don't understand why, as conservatives, we don't take a hold of this thing and say, you know what? Why aren't our prison systems designed to take these young men, because it's mostly young men, 18 to 35, take these young men and train them up? Because, 99% of them will be back on the streets. So if they're going to be back on the streets, don't we want them mentally and emotionally prepared to come back into
Right.
society and pick up their mantle of manhood and go home and take care of their children and get a job and move on with their lives? I don't know about you, but I'd feel a whole lot safer if these people getting out of prison believed that they
Oh
had a
yeah.
hope for their future and came home and they did something productive with their lives.
I think you're right. And I think a lot of this gets back being in law enforcement, full time law enforcement for 35 years.
Yes, sir.
Um, when you look at things like that, you say, okay, well, do we give a break? How do we define those who deserve the break, so to speak? Because
Mm-hmm.
what really happens is we become skewed because we see typically is a revolving door through the prison
Yes.
systems. And because of that, it um, probably disenfranchises those who can better themselves because we as a general society look at the overall abundance as one big picture as opposed to the little the outliers that have
Absolutely. Right.
certain people
Yes.
that
Yeah.
can make a bigger change. And when we do that, we find out there are successes in that bunch, but
Sure.
we have to take that gamble and that chance. And we as men, when we get burnt like that, we tend to drop the hammer.
That's right.
You know, we're not as yielding and forgiving. And by
That's
the
right.
way, Tom, thanks for coming into the show. I'm going to introduce everybody to Thomas Hill. Thomas Hill is the previous GOP Republican of Gates County chair. And
Our former chairman. Yeah.
yeah, former chairman. And he's been
10
really
years.
busy in Gates County and other places. I always let me explain Thomas Hill for you. So hold on, Thomas. So Thomas, Thomas is Thomas is the workhorse. Thomas is the guy who shows up early and leaves late.
That's right.
Thomas is the first one in, last out, and he wants to make sure that he's turning the lights out and can get every vote he can get before he leaves that day. And he will stand there and let you hear about the facts as opposed to the fakeness. So Thomas is one of those that he'll talk to you and ask for your vote, and cordial as he can be, and cordial when he explains to you why you're looking in the wrong direction. So he actually helped me a great deal, and we flipped 6 districts in the seat that I ran for, diehard blue districts. We ended up flipping 6 to red. And the only reason we couldn't do any more is because we ran out of money. So that's just the way that goes. But
You guys
Thomas,
are the
welcome to the
dynamic duo there, Ricky.
Yeah, I'm telling you, we just needed some money. But that's to everybody else's problem. So,
Yeah,
but
Tom is a
we
force to be
flipped.
reckoned with, and a dear brother as well.
Yeah, well, he came out. He helped me in one of the most crooked, I won't say diabolical cities there is of Gotham. I mean Durham. I'm sorry, So he came in there and helped me, and we actually flipped some heavy blue districts into a red,
We did
which is
that. Yes.
freaking unheard of. But we did it, and we were glad we did it, and we turned it red. We showed that it could be done, and
Yes.
so now of course they go back and try to draw the lines, do a little bit different things along the way, and life changes. But anyway, he did that. So Thomas, welcome to the show, my friend.
Yes, sir.
I know
Thank you for having
you've been pretty busy lately. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us what you've been up to and how things are going for you.
Okay, very good. Well, I got to start back when I hit 18. I heard that a gentleman by the name of Jack Kemp was running for vice president, and he was the economic advisor to Reagan, which really energized me to vote for a gentleman by the name of Bob Dole, who was running for president. And so that was my first election that I got involved in, and met individuals within Virginia. Virginia was a Republican state for the presidential for until the 48th year when Obama took over and won it in 2008. It was a diehard Republican, and so I joined the Republican Party. I was an assistant precinct chief judge over there at the Pembroke precinct, and Pastor Earhart knows about that precinct. It was in Hampton, and so and it was a great experience. I got to serve 2 presidents in my life in matters of policy. I also had the pleasure and the honor of serving in the 2020 Electoral College, voting for the gentleman behind me, Donald Trump. And so it has been a wild ride. I've also been the county chair for 10 years here in Gates County. I was the district chair for First Congressional District for just over. In that time span, we've seen net gain of 25. And so it's a phenomenal time period. The Lord has definitely been good. And certainly I want to give homage to my pastor, being the shepherd over the flock. And Ricky, I want to give homage to you and your listeners. Nothing but love to Police Alliance. Nothing but love to you both gentlemen. And I've had the pleasure and the honor of working with both of you. So just an awesome traveling that God has brought me through, and just good stuff. Just good stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, and it does make a difference when you have people that are committed on the ground floor working it. It's that's where it starts. Where do your politics start? It starts at the local level. At the local level, the national level is not going to do a lot to help you because you've got the base. And I think so many people look at the national level and then they let themselves get screwed over at the local level because they're not looking. It's like they keep you looking at the upper echelon and your way of looking out. You're looking at a bigger picture, but you don't understand the picture at all. It's okay to look at the big picture if you understand all the pieces and how they fit. But you got to understand how they fit that gives you that bigger picture. Because if you don't,
What do they say? All politics is local, Ricky.
Exactly, and it is what it is. I mean, that's why we started local, and our job is, I think, a lot of times when you run for office, you shake it up hard at the local level. It makes it a little bit better for the state levels to get their offices in. You might get your butt kicked, but you shook it up enough to get a wake-up call and help somebody up top. Now, I would like to think that, that somehow in North Carolina, eventually in some of these districts, that we can make it a little bit even playing field. It's already an evil playing field. Let's make it an even playing field, because, what happens is you're supercharged at one party at one side, you're 80% Democrat, 20% Republican, and then you expect a Republican to jump out and file a fight, spend his own money, get no support, and bam, you got it. And I say no support because people look at it, they figure, oh, you can't win, so I'm not going to spend my time, energy, and money. And the people on the local level don't want to go out and fight the bushes and fight things, beat the bushes, and be out there in that political war, that war zone itself, knowing that it's all in vain and they're not going to get anywhere. So I can understand that fully. I didn't take that approach on because I don't mind getting in the middle of the fight. To me, it's in how you handle your campaigns and how you approach that. I don't have the kind of money I can be a Donald Trump. I can't throw bombs in the middle of something, but I can deliver my message in a unique way so people understand it. They may not agree with it, but if I write something, I can guarantee you it'll make them think about what I just said. So that's the key thing about getting in place. So, but Eric, getting back to your point a while ago, uh, talking about how do we get Republicans of today to get involved in things like maybe I did, and Thomas will tell you, I jumped into the middle of the mental health issue, and that's how we turned 6 districts in Durham because they were surrounded Duke University. They surrounded the apartment complexes where the Hispanic voters were. These were outreaches that by geofencing and using the services of the geofencing through the cell phones and all that, told people they may not have known me one on one. Many have heard of me. But what I did is, and I want everybody to think about this out there for future campaigns, is it hit their phone. It may have hit somewhere else. They may have got something in the mail. They may have seen what, but the reality is it came with a different message that they weren't used to from a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the best hook because that's how we got more support. Because I got support of people who said, I never voted for Republican, never thought I'd ever vote for Republican. And I'm a member of the Women's Junior League here in Durham, and I'm voting for you.
Yeah.
And that's big because they usually go straight Democrat,
Right. Right.
doctors and everything. So I think it gets back to the point of what we're talking. I use that example is that we have to be willing to do the hard things to make things better and not the
Sure.
comfortable things that we're used to because it feels better.
Well, I like the way you were thinking outside of the box there, and obviously it works. So a couple of things. You addressed a big one a minute ago, and it was this fear that, well, if we let people have their rights back, well, what if they go commit another crime? And I'm like, well, will you lock them up? That's what we're going to do anyway. So I think the Republican Party needs to understand. Now, when I say Republican Party, I'm not talking about what you're talking about, grassroots. I'm talking about the establishment, right?
That's all the way to the top, all the way nationally.
That's
They
right.
got to understand it.
So the apparatus needs to understand, and we as a family are working through this right now. But we need to understand that the Republican Party has assumed the mantle of the party of individual liberty
Yes.
and the party for the working class American. Now that's
Hmm.
something new that came in with Trump, and it came in after 8 years of Obama unleashing the police state on us, the IRS, the
Hmm.
ATF, on and on and on. Right?
Amen. I hear you there.
So, so, so the Republican Party, which traditionally has not been the individual liberty party and has not really been the working class party, that was the blue dog Democrat section of their coalition. Now that group is in the Republican Party, like it or not. This working class middle America is now
Right.
Republicans, and they vote Republican. And so we
Right.
need to understand that. And another thing is to realize that we keep allowing the left to have this narrative on doing good for people who have messed their lives up, right? And we see what they do with it. They're letting people out without bail. That's insane, right? If you commit a crime, if you've been charged with a
Yeah.
robbery or something like that, your bond ought to be so high that you either can't get out or that there ain't no way you ain't going to show back up for court, right?
Right.
So anyway, so the Republican Party is really missing an opportunity to speak to this working class Americans. Ricky, I mean, you realize there's 22 million Americans like me who have been convicted of a felony, did their time, and they're back in life right now. And then on top of that, the statistic I saw last, that over 110 million Americans have been convicted of some type of crime, right? So it's 22 million felonies, and there's another 90 million people who have, they got busted for a DWI, or they got,
Right.
they got caught hunting without out of season, or whatever it is. Just 100 million Americans have some kind of criminal record. Well, number one, that speaks to the fact there's way too much regulation. We're a regulation nation, and we're becoming a police state. And so the Republican Party is missing an opportunity here to really seize the mantle of individual liberty. And it's because they're struggling with themselves of being this party that's always defended the establishment. They've always defended the FBI. They've always defended these things. And I'm all for the individual police officer. Like I said, I was a cop's kid growing up. I literally remember the day when I could ride on the front seat, standing up on the front seat with my dad, and I could in a 1972 Plymouth Fury 3 police car, and I could turn on the sirens. I remember that, right? That was the day when you didn't put kids in car seats. Anyway, so we're missing a moment here if we don't realize that we have an answer for this question. We can say to people, if you've done the crime, do the time. But once you've done the time, we believe you should be restored to full citizenship and go out and do good in your community, right? So we've got to capture this narrative of hope for the future, and because the Democrats buy votes, we all know that. I mean, there's nothing new about that, and I think that's going to backfire on them with all these Mexicans, because these people are mostly conservatives, right? Most of these immigrants that have come in the last 20 years, they're Catholic, they're conservative, they're family people, and I think over this next generation, as that group moves into the middle class, they're going to lose. The Democrats are going to lose their vote because they're going to come back to their conservative roots. But we need to be the party that's able to speak to that working class American and say, we're going to get the government off your back. We know people make mistakes, but you can have hope for the future. Pay your debt and get on with your life. Like, these are simple things that we can resonate with the average American, and they will respond to it. I guarantee you.
Well, and the reality too is, and you relate back, if you kind of go back where this all started, and I've had this conversation with a lot of people, is when you had Lyndon Baines Johnson,
yes,
president, he was the social president. Everything was gimme, gimme, gimme. And and when you heard his philosophy, it wasn't for the better of America. It was the better of the Democratic vote. It was the vote. And that vote came to Lynn for the simple reason was, if we keep giving and giving and giving, and the expectation grows to keep taking and taking, then we can get the people keep coming back to the well. We then own them.
That's right.
We feed them from the well. We feed them from wherever. It's like Caesar throwing out the leaves and everything from the balcony, and the Roman Empire to his many, many loyal supporters. Well, that's kind of the concept that the Democrats took on with Lyndon Baines Johnson, because people don't realize it. Lyndon Baines Johnson wasn't a great civil rights leader who promoted civil rights.
He was a racist.
He promoted the vote. He was
right.
more worried about the vote. He could care less about anything else.
That's right.
Now, if he could win the vote, he's there. And the only way to win it was, hey, I got something here. If I get, it's like a drug. If you get people addicted to the drug, and then they keep coming back.
Sure.
And what he did is he got people addicted to free and easy, and that's why they stayed. And that created a cycle that hadn't gone away and still exists today, because that's generally, I mean, sure, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had the New Deal and all those things there. So that was early on. But this was just another restart from that process early on.
That's right.
That picked up and ran with it, because, again, it was about getting people addicted to the free Therefore, they were going to vote for the free because Lord knows we don't want to vote for somebody who's going to take it from me.
Exactly. And I think most of this, look, the underlying premise of most of this, Ricky, is Marxism, right?
Mhm.
And the idea is to replace God with government.
Yep.
And so traditionally, people were self-reliant. They worship God. Now, whether you did it as like some flaming evangelical Christian or just you believed in Judeo-Christian ethic. My dad was not a Christian man growing up, but he grew up in a time in America where Christian values are what was expected of everyone. And so
Hmm.
he carried and conducted himself a certain way, right? And so what the Marxist narrative is to remove the individual and create a group. And they get these group dynamics, like you were talking about Caesar on the balcony. They create these group dynamics, and so now it's gays and trans and black and women, and they
Hmm.
create these group dynamics, and then they control that group's vote, right? And
Hmm.
so the idea is always getting back to the individual liberty, individual responsibility, individual hope, individual freedom, and we have to seize that. Now it's going to be a hard poll. We started this interview, Ricky, with me telling you that all the way back in the 1970s, the government had already designed welfare
Hmm.
under LBJ. He's the one that
Hmm.
designed it.
Oh yeah.
Already designed welfare to destroy the American family, the nuclear family, right? It was already doing it in the 1970s when I was a boy. And so that has been the most effective tool that the Democratic Party has had, because what they've done is traditional families, nuclear families, vote conservative way more than they vote liberal. In fact, we saw this in this last cycle, right? What was
Yes.
the number one
Yes.
voting block for the Democrats this last cycle? It was single women. It was single
Hmm.
women. Well, once you realize that most women are single now because they don't get married, they might have children, but they don't get married, right? Now you understand that there's a constituency they've created because married couples who are together, living together, raising their children, vote conservative 77% of the time, right? And so it's not with it's not with some diabolical planning that they didn't know that tearing apart the family structure was going to benefit them. And so you rightly, and the thing is, this is crazy. I don't know if you've looked up the Moynihan report. If you
Hmm.
haven't looked this up yet, Rick, you need to look at this. So in 1968, a gentleman who went on to become a senator and stayed a senator a long time, Daniel Patrick Moynihan from New York.
Yep.
Well, he was a professor at New York College in 1968, and he looked at from 1965, from the civil rights legislation to 1968. He looked at 3 years of data, and by 1968, he already was able to prophetically say that the welfare system as designed, in just 3 years he saw this, was going to destroy the black family in America and eventually begin to destroy families altogether. So in 1965, when that legislation came out, single parent household, children being raised in a single parent household in a black family, in the black community was about 26%. In the
Hmm.
white community, it was about 6%. Now we're at 80% of black children are born into a home with a single parent, and about 53% of white children are born into a home with a single parent. That legislation, that welfare program, effectively enslaved Americans to these broken homes and dysfunctional lives.
Right.
Well, gentlemen, I want
That
to,
and
if I may, I'd like to bring something up to you all. This is also an economic issue. And if we, two ways of that we could this, we could have people work and pay taxes, or
Mm-hmm.
we could shove them in jail and pay for their housing as a three hots and a cot, right? And so what I wanted to
Mhm.
do was I bring to you all a Ronald Reagan that Jack Kemp actually drew for Ronald Reagan. And so he did it on a napkin for Ronald Reagan. I want to bring that to you all. If we take this, I don't know if y'all can see that or not. However, if we take this and we tax 100%, that means nobody wants to work because everything that they are working for is going to go straight to the government.
Mhm.
If we don't tax at all, then the government gets zero and we get 100% of it. So the fight is between the Democrats and the Republicans on the level of taxes. Now, the issue is that if we take the individuals that's in jail and we have them with a working program to acculate them to society, then we could actually have them be productive in society, paying taxes. And if I may remind you, gentlemen, we have a 32, I think it's actually 34 plus now, $1 trillion deficit and growing every day because of LBJ, his policies, and how rambunctious it is with our economy. So not only is this a issue of policy, not only is this an issue of laws, but this is a catastrophe on our economy and on the weight of the dollar. Our dollar is no longer worth as much as it has been in times past. We can see the inflation hitting us now. And for those seats that the Republicans did win in this past midterm, it was done because of them recognizing the inflation and the devaluing of our own dollar. So there's a lot of asks going on. And of course, I've heard talk about the laws, and I've talked about the society and the policies put in place. But I just want to remind you all that with the economy per se, it has been devastating. LBJ has been devastating to our economy. And if I may remind you, going back even before him, he actually worked for the government under Roosevelt. And so he was learning all these big government programs from Roosevelt. So
Right.
I'd like to go back to Roosevelt when it was big government, and then Jay really implement that and really hurt the economy. So just as a reminder, the value of our dollar devaluing because of all of these policies been put in place.
Well,
Yeah,
the New Deal was a deal breaker for a lot of things that went on, and the reality is back in the Depression and things of that nature, things. Yeah, I get it. They had to come up with some ideas of how to survive and how to get to where they need to get, and all the state projects and all the state roads and all the highways. But the reality is it makes it, it still makes it tough today because you can't do those kind of things today because we've outgrown that concept because we bankrupt our country as it is with the trillions and trillions of dollars in the budget. And Thomas, you remind me of Carl Rowe with the whiteboard there, buddy. We have to get you a whiteboard. You're killing me, man. You're killing me. What does it say? As my wife says, you're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me. Bless your heart. Hey, Thomas. Bless your heart.
Yeah, you still her. I said hi. I love that.
Your point about the economics is your point about the economics is well taken because you know that, and we all know this, that most crime is committed in poor neighborhoods.
Right.
The more economically disadvantaged you are, the more likely you are to be raised in a neighborhood where crime is the prevalent part of it, right? And so upward economic mobility, we'll use a word for that called a hope, right?
Yeah.
Hope. And so I remember you guys probably remember this, but there was a famous KGB cable that was intercepted back in 1959 by the CIA. And the KGB operative here in the United States was cabling back to Moscow and giving a report on why they were not doing very well on getting inroads into communism. And he said this. He said the problem is that the average American sees themselves as a millionaire that just hasn't made it yet, right? And so this idea of the American dream of upward mobility, of hope that I can do better and my kids can do better than I. Look, if we don't recognize that is a powerful force, a dynamic that changes people's whole world, if they believe they can do better, if they believe that one day they can move out of that apartment and own a home, if they believe that they can do better than their parents or grandparents. And so that economic piece of this puzzle, the Republican Party definitely has to grab a hold of that and have not just say how bad Biden's doing, but we better be able to say to
Yeah.
Americans what we can do to make it better for the average citizen.
Well, the thing is, when you talk about hope, and I've said this, and Thomas heard me say that. Now I've added a caveat to this, Thomas. So get ready. Hold on for a new ism. Hope is not a strategy, but it is the best manipulator. Think about that. Hope can manipulate as well as it can be a strategy, and
Yeah.
it does. It affects the mindset of, yes, it's not a strategy,
No.
but it's a dream.
That's
It
right.
does manipulate the future thought process, and as long as you can,
things not seen.
right, it is. I mean, and that's the thing. And so I always tell me, yeah, well, what was the movie? There's lead in the air, there's hope in the heart. Wasn't that a couple of Apocalypse Now or something other? Well, the reality is while as long as there's a thought process of something that is bigger, better, greater, that you as a family unit accomplish more, then in fact, hope does exist. You can't not have hope in that way. However, as long as we understand hope is not a strategy, it's something that's there, but it's not your strategy to success.
No, it's an powerful internal force. When I was sitting in the penitentiary, Ricky, and I know you probably remember this from your years in law enforcement, you run into a hopeless man and you run into a dangerous man,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so a man that doesn't have any hope in him
Right.
is a dangerous force. But a man that does have some hope in him is on a trajectory to do better. And I remember sitting in that prison, in the penitentiary, looking around me, and I could almost clearly see the men who were dreaming of doing better when they got out. They were dreaming of how life was going to be. I'm going to get a job. My wife and I are going to, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. So their very words spoke of hope. I'm going to get out and I'm going to do something better with my life. And then you had those who were hopeless, and they were dangerous inside and they were dangerous outside because they had no belief that once a man believes that no matter what he does, life is not going to get better, he's dangerous. He's now in survival mode. And I had found myself at that place. And I can tell you, it makes you almost like a dangerous animal. Like if you get too close to it, it's going to bite you, right? Because they don't believe that any efforts they put forth are going to make anything better. And we see that, in election cycles. Like if people, we all know that how if people don't believe their team's going to win, then they will not show up to the poll. They simply they stay home. It suppresses the vote, right?
Right.
So it's not a strategy. I like that. That's not a strategy, but it's an energy. It's an internal force that will drive people to do better. So we have to have a message and a strategy that latches on to hope, so that people now will get energized and get involved and see that what you're doing for them makes their future better, or at least their children's future better.
It does. It does.
Well, back in 2002, and I about this with another individual just days ago, but in 2002, there was a group by the name of Parents Educating Parents that created Dads for Hire. And so we would take dads that needed to pay their child support, and we would give them a job. I remember I took one dad with me to a brick masonry, and we laid down some Scott things. And I refused to pay the money. I let him take it, and of course the Lord blessed me later. But it was a blessing just to be a part of that. So if there's no job, if there's no money, if there's no, as you would say, hope, for them to have the strength just to get up the next day and go do something with an objective, a goal in mind, something that spirit to energize you to do something. As the old saying is, the devil's mind, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So we want to make sure that we're doing something productive inside. And forgive me, I keep bringing up these economic issues, but really see a black versus white, or a old versus young, or what I'm really seeing in society really is the poor versus the rich, and that's where most of these problems are from. And by golly, it's got to be taken care of.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that thought, let's take about just a 2 or 3 minute break, and we'll be right back so the viewers can take a break, go get them something to drink, come back and enjoy the rest of the show. And then if you guys would stand by and hold on, we'll come right back.
Yes, sir.
What law enforcement should look like in our state. You know, I've never been a type of politician to make promises. I never stood on the stage and said, I promise you that if I'm elected, I'll never do that. Except this once. Now I'm gonna tell you the promise I'm gonna make. And you know, any of y'all know me know that I believe that God is organizing my footsteps. And if God should see fit to make me the governor of this great state, if it is his will that I serve the people of North Carolina in that capacity, then I make this solemn promise. Might not be day one, might not be day two, but I guarantee you by day 3, we're gonna call a press conference. And that press conference is gonna be me, and that press conference is gonna be the chiefs of police from across the state, the sheriffs from across the state, the DAs from across the state, and I'm gonna line them up in front of me, and I'm gonna point out to the cameras, and I'm gonna tell the criminals and the thugs and the rioters and the bombers and the burners and the statue puller downers, it's a new day in North Carolina, and you will not be tolerated anymore. Law and order is back in the house, and somebody is here to stand up for these men and women in blue that put their lives on the line for us. We will no longer tolerate your foolishness, and if you don't believe me, just try it. It's high time in this nation and in this state that we stood up once again for law enforcement. The dreadful effects of what has happened since this whole era of defund the police, we're not talking about something that's just cost money. We're literally talking about something that has cost lives, destroyed lives. And it is time for elected officials to get a spine and a backbone and once again stand behind the men and women of law enforcement so that they can be proactive in what they do, not reactive in what they do. And I make that solemn promise now that that will happen. And we have another vision. We got another vision out there on the horizon. We got a vision where when a man or woman retires from Fort Bragg, Camp Lejeune,
All right, everybody. Welcome back to the Rick Padgett Show. It's your America, It doesn't belong to government. It doesn't belong to the president, the White House. It doesn't belong to anybody but you. We are America. So welcome back. And I'd like to welcome back with us Eric J. Earhart to talk a little bit more about his book and some of the things that are going on. And so let's hear a little bit more. And how do we get that book, by the way?
You can find it on Amazon or on my website, which is epechopapa2020.com.
Okay. All righty. So let's pick up where we left on the book a little bit. We're going to start talking about that. So just pick up back where what we were talking about a little bit, and how it ties into how we foresee our future as a party as it relates to some of the things. And when I was reading your book, it gave a lot of a sense of direction, thought process, where we've been, where we have to go, what are we willing to accept, and how do we get around those kind of things? How do we get people more involved, and other than just reading your book, and that's going to be a plus, but how do we get people involved, and what's our next step?
Sure, thank you. Well, it was interesting watching the ad clip for Lieutenant Governor Robson, who I love. He's been to our church now on multiple occasions, and just love him and Yolanda, precious people. Truly a man who was selected by God for his mission. And listening to his ad and then mine, because that really speaks to there's these two ends in the Republican Party. And we got to find somewhere in the middle where we can move forward.
Right.
So there's, I think every politician, Ricky, offers a utopian view of the way things should be. Like, we just have to. I know that I would show up at places and I'd have 1 minute to speak or 3 minutes to speak. And my goodness, what in the world are you going to tell people about your platform or your plank in 1 minute or 3 minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I get it that it's very difficult to get into substantive issues and policies when you're out campaigning. But the reality is ultimately, I think as conservatives, we need not just a next election cycle message. We need a next generation message. We need, what are we about? Where are we going? And what do we say to people that allows them to know? Because I think this is, the exit polling said this over and over and over again this cycle. People didn't believe that Republican candidates had any substance of what they were going to do.
No message.
All they were saying was what was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
They were not saying anything they were going to do. So the reality is we need a message. And I just believe one of the primary messages that we can now, the mantle we can assume, is that mantle of individual liberty and freedom. Now, individual liberty and freedom has a cost. It has a duty aspect to it. It has an accountability aspect to it. But that's where we're going astray in this nation. That's the reality, is we're going to a collective nation. We're moving in collectivism. You can call it Marxism, communism, whatever you want. But in every sphere of life here in the United States, what we keep seeing us moving into is this collectivism. And it removes the sovereignty of the individual. And so without boring your audience too much, I would say this, that if we don't get back to our roots, and those roots go all the way back to the founding of this nation. You see, those men were Christians, or they were at least raised in a world that understood that God is sovereign, and because man is made in God's image, man is a sovereign being here on earth. And there's no kings and there's no slaves, that every man is equal in the sight of God. And so they designed a government that made that so. It's not perfect. It's a more perfect union, as Lincoln called it, right? Mm-hmm. And so the Republican Party has an opportunity to develop a message that says, this is what we stand for. And it's just simply constitutionalism. We'll call it constitutional conservatism. That if we will get back to the sovereignty of the individual, holding government in check. I mean, look, I don't want to replay 2016 for you, my friend, but the FBI was in cahoots with one of our two political parties to try to first take down a candidate and then take down a sitting president. That in my lifetime, I'm 55 years old, and I've never thought I would ever see such a third world action in my lifetime in the United States.
Right.
You know, we have a secret court that 93%. I actually one of the ladies that was on the campaign trail with me was a federal prosecutor, and she was running for the U.S. Senate, and I asked her about the FISA court, and she said she never had to write a FISA warrant, but she saw many of them come through her office. And I asked her about how many of them were for foreign actors and how many of them were used against Americans. Because if you remember, this FISA court was part of the Patriot Act, and it was only supposed to stop Islamic terrorism. Right? This woman told me, Ricky, that 93% of the FISA warrants are against U.S. citizens that have nothing to do with terrorism. And if you don't think people will swamp, I like that term, right? If you don't think the swamp, the permanent government state, the police state, if you don't think they use those powers for nefarious reasons and for political reasons, then we're just simply naive. So the Republican Party has an opportunity to stand up and say what they believe, right? And to stand for these individual liberties. I mean, come on, Donald Trump had a Republican Senate and a Republican House, and he couldn't even get them to participate with him in stopping the madness on our border. And he did it anyway, bless him. Thank God for Donald Trump, right? That whatever you think about the man, and I have some problems with him, like all of us, because I don't, no one agrees with everybody. But that man understood what our nation was facing on a basic level. And he understood, and this is how he changed the Republican Party. He understood what the average construction worker was facing in America. He understood what the average truck driver was facing in America. And he stood for those people. And it changed the whole nature of the Republican Party. And the Republican Party's not yet wrestled with that. And so what we need is legislators, and what we need is representatives that are willing to take on the police state, that are willing to hold the FBI accountable, that is willing to roll back these regulations that are destroying us. My goodness, my friend, we're getting ready to have 87,000 new IRS employees. Now, they promise us that they're not going to be coming after the average individual citizen, until you realize that 67% of all IRS audits are for people making less than $50,000 a year. This is who our IRS is going after: Americans who make less than $50,000 a year. Are you kidding me? And we have 87,000 new IRS agents. So my point is this: that my book is simply one plank of a platform that says we've got to get back to being a nation that recognizes the sovereignty of the individual in the sight of God and in the sight of government. And if we don't do that, we're becoming irrelevant as a party.
Yeah, and it's like one of the things I think that Trump did through the Republican Party is that they made it unrecognizable to the Democrats, which made them more a challenge to the Democrats.
Yes,
because they're not recognized. Because what you saw a man who came out who was frustrated, a man who saw that America was angry, and a man who was smart enough to capitalize on America's anger.
Exactly.
And where other people didn't want to do that because, quote unquote, they didn't want to offend,
right?
But to shake up. When a man says, "I'm running for president, but woe be unto anyone who thinks they can come at me like they have everybody else." Because what Trump did, he brought to the light everything that was being done in the dark.
Exactly. That's why they hated him.
Yeah, because he brought up the ugliness, the smear campaigns, the tactics that were being used. He brought to the surface the underpinning, the sludge, the misfits, the grime of the gutter of all these politicians that hung out in it when you didn't see them, but they sure dressed pretty and came up to the top. But when they were underneath it, they were too busy playing cutthroat against each other and setting people up. So they could win the WWE or WWF Battle Royal at the end of the night, because it's kind of like these reality shows.
Right.
They were for themselves, and however they sliced it, diced it, cut it, whatever they did, they were trying to surface to the top. They wanted to be the number one guy, and that's what they do. And people get confused when they say, well, there is no deep state. Yeah, there is. There is no one party deep state. That
Right.
deep state is filled up with people from all different parties.
Absolutely.
And don't think that the left hand and the right hands and the left hands and the right hand, all of them, aren't shaking hands and making business deals in the dark,
That's
as real people, real professionals do in the light of the day.
Well, Donald Trump had been buying these people for 30 years. He knew
And
who they were.
That's what made him so. That's what made him so strong. He said, "I know. I used to buy every one of them."
He knows how these people were, right? And so
Yeah.
and look, when he started going after the neocons, right? Those conservatives, those Republicans that have never met a war that they don't love and don't love making a dollar off of the defense industry, like right now with Ukraine, right? The billions and billions of dollars we've sent there is just absolutely insane. And I love what the president of Poland said the other day. He just said out loud, he said, look, had Donald Trump won the election in 2020, Putin would have never invaded Ukraine. He'd have known better than to do it, right?
Right.
And that was the bottom line. So the strength that Donald Trump was showing economically, and because that's in the end, this is all economics. It's all economics. Putin's doing what he's doing for money.
Right.
Everybody's doing that. Look, the people that are streaming across our border. What do they say? As of October 1st, it was 3.6 million people this year alone. That's an invasion, right?
Yeah.
And then we have Schumer say out loud that, well, yeah, we really need them as workers because Americans ain't having no babies. Well, yeah, that's because you raised a generation of Americans in our public school system to back to what I was saying. They don't believe in family. They don't believe in having children. We've raised a generation of Americans who don't know what bathroom to use, let alone whether they're going to go get married and have babies, right? And so he said out loud, what's really happening is that we need this slave labor to come across our border to keep this system going that they have in place, right? And so Trump was exposing this system that both parties take place in, and they absolutely blew a gasket. And their friends in the media blew a gasket with them, right? And so he was exposing all of this. And so and I love what, and this seems disconnected, but it's not. So Trey Gowdy, after he decided not to run again, and I used to love Trey Gowdy, but I was so confused with how he was acting during the Mueller investigation, and while he was, and like, why isn't he standing with Trump, and why can't Trey Gowdy see what the FBI is doing? Right? It was freaking me out because I thought this is a man that understands that that the government can be used for nefarious reasons, because he tried to hold Obama and Clinton their feet to the fire for Fast and Furious and for Benghazi and on and on. So, but all of a sudden, he wasn't standing with Trump to this stuff. And so after he decided not to run for re-election in the midterms there in 2018, it was about 6 months later, I saw him in a Fox interview. And he said the thing that he regretted most, maybe it was a year later, it was in 2019. He said the thing that he regretted most was that as a former federal prosecutor, he just could not bring himself to believe that our FBI leadership had become so politicized that they would do what he now knows that they did, right? So that's kind of no one wanted to believe that the deep state was so deep and was so nefarious, and Trump was exposing this. And even good representatives like Trey Gowdy could not believe that it was as dirty and as deep as it was.
So vile. And the thing is, so you take and you look at everything that goes on now in today's existence, the people where the rubber meets the road, the agents that are out on the ground. You talked about a while ago, there's 87,000 new IRS agents coming. And let me tell you what I think. this is what I believe to the core. We are not going to give up our guns. We're not going to
Right.
freely walk in hand in our guns.
Right.
But what the administration is going to do, and the left is trying to do, is they're trying to tax you out of your guns. And if
Exactly.
you don't pay the taxes on your guns and your ammo, they
Right.
have 87,000 new armed agents that's going to try and come and get them.
That's right.
Which that's going to be a whole new civil war.
That's right.
Just like this thing with Trump. You're not going to convince me that let them indict him, and you're going to watch a country go up in arms like you have never seen before.
Sure.
Because there are, you don't need 50% of the population. All you need is 10 to 15% of the population to get mad.
That's right.
And start fighting and start siding up and start doing the things that we don't want to see happen in this country. That's what that's all they got to have. Just give them 10 to 15%.
You probably realize that the number of patriots during the Revolutionary War was only about 17% when it started. That 80% of the people, over 80% of the people, sided with the crown and wanted to stay with the crown.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't take, like you said, it doesn't take 50% of the nation. It just takes those few that will fight for freedom.
What happens if 10 to 15 or 17% show up with their heavy armory or their weapons or whatever they end up signing to do with it, or they do take those standards and they do take that? What you end up with is a nation of.
I just Googled this for you. There's more than 20 million ARs in the hands of Americans.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you put that in perspective, the United States Army and the United States Marine Corps, if you take the fighting soldiers, the infantry, you're only talking about 300,000 soldiers, right? That are the infantry, the ones that kick doors in, right? Against 20 million ARs.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I don't think they realize what they're trying to do.
Right.
And here's the other thing is, I'm not in support of any of that nonsense. I don't think we need to be a nation that goes into civil war and you end up fighting each other and all that. I'm not for that. But my concern is that there's going to be a segment of the population that will be, and they're going to be armed and they're going to be ready. And then how do we as a nation, how do we deal with that? Because it's going to be neighbor against neighbor. It's going to be awful. And you take this nonsense that the prosecutor explains, they're going to go after Trump. They're going to have Trump. Trump knows the secrets of the world. Do you really think they're going to put him in jail? Because Trump is going to be somebody who goes, you watch this. Put me in jail and watch what I got to say.
Right.
Don't think he don't know where all the bodies are hidden as the president.
That's right.
Or what really going on in these peoples. So to say we're going to arbitrarily put the president in jail they never did Clinton for what he did. They never did, and they sure haven't done. You take somebody like Biden who's been in there, who may have made $160,000 a year later on when he was in the Senate, but there's no way in God's green earth that man should be worth $300 million or $400 million right now. Unless there's some corruption going on, because I don't know about you, but if I don't make X amount of dollars a year and the government keeps up with it and I'll mysteriously jump up and I got $100 million.
Right. They're coming.
Don't you think they're going to come look at me knocking on my door and say, and the first thing I'm going to say is I got the money from Thomas Hill. Check with Thomas Hill. He's the one that gave me all this money. So, but anyway,
exactly. Yeah. If one of us show up with a 400% increase in our income one year, one of those 87,000 IRS agents are showing up at your house. I can guarantee you.
Oh, right? Yes. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of like, and I say that just being funny, picking on Thomas because he's not here for me to pick on him. And, it's always fun to pick on somebody that's not there. Of course, I'm sure he'll pay.
But your point about the corruption, and that's what's really the reality is Trump was exposing the corruption, right?
Yes.
And they were not going to let that happen. There's no way they're going to let it happen. And that's probably the reason why they won't ever actually pursue any charges against him, right? But it's also the reason, and this is what stinks, because look, there's probably no more dirty politician, if you think about pay for play, than Joe Biden.
Oh my God.
47 years in government, and this man's never held a job. He's always been
Biden's and the Clintons, buddy. Biden's and the Clintons. They
That's
have
right.
been generational.
just as dirty as the day is long. And the reality is even if the Republicans pursue the Hunter stuff, and they're going to, they should just keep their feet to the fire. But no one's ever there's no one ever, no Senate is ever going to vote. Even a 100% Republican Senate would not vote for Joe Biden to be impeached. Right? They're not going to do it because it would expose all of them and all of the dirt that all of them do.
But the House will, and I think the House will
absolutely.
The House will do an impeachment on Joe Biden. I think that's going to be automatic.
That's right.
Simply because there's more there than ever was there.
Absolutely.
When Trump was there. Everything they did with Trump was a bunch of bogus.
That's right.
BS. So, but the reality is, it's the facts are going to come clear. It's not going to be hidden. One of the things about losing the House was now that there's going to be light on the Biden incident. And the press now, you see the press kind of backpedaling now. You see they're coming back saying, "Oh wow, we just had our own people look at the computer, and wow, that stuff is real."
But they know the dirt's going to come out. So the House will. There's no doubt the House is going to vote to impeach Biden, but the Senate's not going to, right?
Well, and the House is going to issue subpoenas. People aren't going to come. And Merrick Garland's not going to do for them what he did for the Democrats.
Right.
He's not going to do it. It would be a Guinness Book of World's Record if Merrick Garland it followed on and looked at the first subpoena and drug anybody into court like he did the Republicans just to politicize the Attorney General's office. And then that's exactly what we done. We have a politicized big time Attorney General's office where they're more worried about politics and going after parents who get mad at school boards and stuff like that. So that's going to be a totally new show.
Merrick Garland should be impeached, and Mayorkas. Mayorkas has overseen this invasion of our nation, and I get it. He's doing it because his boss told him to. So we can't impeach his boss, but we can impeach him. Mayorkas has got to go.
But I don't know if you have to have impeachment from both Senate or just a House. I'm not really sure about the department heads.
Not either.
But they can restrict their funding if they don't replace them. And I think that's what they're going to go after. Biden talking all that junk throughout the election that he didn't care. But you now see him backpedaling on a little bit on finances and monies. So you're seeing it a little bit. Backpedaling. That sounds funny the way he rides a bicycle. Backpedaler. So anyway. But anyway, again, Eric, this has been great. I think we can do this again. And anytime you want to come on the show and just talk about what's going on locally, anything that's going on, anything that you got on your mind, we'll be glad to open up the door, bring you back, and let you talk to the viewers and let them get a little bit know more about who you are and what's going on in your neck of the woods and maybe what your future plans are about some of the things you may have on the horizon. You never know. Exactly. Shh, don't say it too loud, right? Because it's always something out there around the corner.
Right.
I'm finding more and more that I enjoy the side of it from this side than maybe running for public office, because I think you can get to a lot of people this way. I think communication is key, and just get the right message out there to the voters of what's going on out there. And there's so many things that we've got to look at. I mean, we're lucky that we got the House back. We got to really work to get that Senate seat back, at least at a 50-50, because basically the Senate turned out to a wash because the Republicans sat home because all they heard was the red wave. And I thought for sure that it would be a lot stronger, but the people sat home because they figured it was going to be such a strong wave. They didn't have to go vote. They didn't have to go vote. And that's what I think happened in the long run.
Yeah, well,
but again,
there were some bright spots. North Carolina was a bright spot.
Yeah,
Florida
we're one seat away from being a supermajority.
Super majority, baby.
Golly,
exactly.
We just almost got it, didn't we?
That's right.
And
we saw a dynasty here in my area. So my GA rep, Howard Hunter, which was a 3-generation dynasty, grandfather, father, and then grandson.
Mhm.
3 generations of hunters have held that seat, and that seat is just turned over to Bill Ward. So that kind of gave you an idea of
Mhm.
how red the wave was here in North Carolina. It was pretty
Yeah,
significant.
and the Supreme Court really give us a big victory on that. And
Yes,
here's
sir.
the,
Yep.
and here's I think what people are not thinking of in the next election. I think you're more likely to see the bigger red because the seats that are up next time are going to be majority Democrat seats.
Right.
The
That's
Democrats
right.
are going to be on the defensive trying to save their seats, and what
Yeah.
you're going to see is a bigger red come across there.
Yeah.
So I believe that's going to be it's going to be easier to flip some of them seats, or to guarantee the seats than it was this time, and he did it. So we got in politics, where like I said, we have to find the message and stay on message.
Yes.
It has to be done,
Yeah.
but like I said, it was just interesting to see how you thought the races that were going to be shoe in for maybe the Republican didn't quite go, or the ones that you thought the Democrat had to shoe in surprised everybody and didn't go. I mean, it's when you look at the totality of the big picture of each district, there's so much different, and the way they drew the lines, it was all a kind of a hit and miss, a shot in the dark, that favored certain power brokers within the House, North Carolina House, anyway. So, but again, I appreciate you coming in, staying in, and updating on your book. Give us one more time how we can buy your book, how we can check it out, and then
Absolutely. It's called Emancipation Proclamation, a prophetic call to set the captives free. You can find it on Amazon, or you can find it on my website at ep2020.com. You can catch me on Twitter at Eric J. Earhart, and then on the what's it called, Instagram at EJE_Hart. In fact, I shared I tweeted an analysis the other day. I think it would be interesting to close on with what you were just saying. And this gentleman's analysis from the Federalist was a good, really a good look at the Republican Party as a snapshot. And it was basically a realization that the Republicans don't have a conservative message that they coalesce around. So like the Democratic Party, basically, and this gentleman looked at, like, I think he looked at 28 races, and all 28 races, the Democrat stayed on the Democrat talking points. That was it. That message. They did not stray on abortion, on it didn't matter what it was. They were right in line. But then he looked at Republicans, and he found that in these same 28 races, the Republican candidate might be for border security, but then also weak on abortion, and or they might be strong on abortion, but then for open borders. And so these 28 Republican candidates, unlike their Democratic
mhm.
opposition, they did not seem to have a message they could coalesce around, and a path forward for our nation. Now, some of that is the nature of being a conservative, where we kind of have our own thoughts. We're not lockstep. We're not politically and ideologically kind of lockstep together and goose stepping. You'll find Republican candidates are much more individualistic. Praise the Lord, because we're supporters of the individual. But on the basics, Ricky, we need to have a message that says to America that if you choose us, if you let us go and represent you, we will govern well, and this is what we'll do. If we don't have that, Americans are just not going to choose our candidates, and that's the reality. We
Well,
need to have a message.
and I think you're right, because I think what happened last time, I kept saying, and I think Newt Gingrich was even saying on TV and us, they've got to package their message and get a message out there. And what happened is when you got TV commentators from all the stations saying Republicans don't have a message,
Right.
and then all of a sudden Republicans show up with a message 30 days before the election.
Right.
That's kind of late, because they had a message. They just
Right.
couldn't get their message out because they dragged their feet, because they had Mitch McConnell dragging them down and dragging their feet, and they had bigger issues to Friday. They couldn't come together with a message because
Sure.
they couldn't
That's
come
right.
together with some of the candidates.
Well, that's back to that, you were saying earlier. So the Mitch McConnells of the party, and this is the problem. These guys have been there a long time, and they don't really know what to do with this new Republican Party that's more libertarian, more individualistic, more blue collar. They just don't know what to do with it, and they better get a message for these people, or they're going to lose.
Well, they're going to be part of the party. You better figure out how to embrace the concept, because they're not going anywhere. And
That's
that's a Donald Trump thing.
Exactly.
Donald brought them in the party, and you can say what you want to say, but Donald Trump's still the leader of the party, and whether they like it or not, because even in this election, they said, well, he's lost some. Well, he won 190 some races, and only lost
That's
12
right.
or 13.
Yeah.
Give me a break. Cut me a break. You know what I
That's
mean?
right.
That's the way it is.
That's right.
Well, look, again, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And glad to have you here. And let's do this again real soon. And I'll be getting up with you on something on the side later anyway. We'll follow up on an earlier conversation that we had. Because my book, I'm looking to get my book out to Amazon within the next 2 to 3 months.
I'm excited about that.
Yeah. So anyway, and then like I said, anytime you want to stop in, let me know. We'll open the door, and you'll be here at that show. And I try to keep this venue open for anybody who wants to come in. And we're very conservative, but I'll open the door to the liberal too. The liberal want to come in and have a conversation. Hey, that's the only way we get things done. Sometimes you got to
I'll
listen
debate
to
anyone. Yeah.
I used to tell me, if you can't learn how to dance like this you can't learn how to dance like the left if you don't go to the parties that the left is throwing.
Right.
And I always tell them is, you can't learn how to find out things and information that the devil has unless you're willing to go to his party.
Yeah.
And sometimes you got to dance with a sister too. That ain't always good. What can you say? But it's not a good, and that's the analogy that I think that people in the party have finally taken on when it comes to dealing with the left, because you have to get in the trenches to see what the evil that's there. You can't do it sitting on the sideline as a spectator. We can no longer be a spectator sport. We got to save future generations of our children, and we got to give our country back to the children and the future of our children. And we have no choice. That's not an option.
I've got 6 kids, and I want them to live more free than I do.
Absolutely. Again, thanks, Eric, for stopping in.
Thank you, man.
And the rest of the listeners, if you'll stand by, and I will be right back.
Bless you.
Thomas, welcome back to the show. Glad to see you again. Thank you for coming right back on in. I thought it was a pretty good, interesting first part of the show tonight. I think it really put out a pretty positive message about the Republican Party and where we're heading. So I think we got something to talk about. Let's talk about maybe the electorate. How about that? That's some of the things that we looked at in the past, and some of the things that go on with the political electorate, of how we vote as Americans and how that vote carries our way up. So, we actually have a changing electorate too. We actually have this process that we go through to get to those levels. It's not just going to show up. I think, we just don't show up and vote on election day and the vote goes out. There's a lot goes into voting behind the scenes that get the people in position to do what we do. And you're one of those people. So how about tell us a little bit about your experience and how that plays out all the way in Gates County and throughout?
Okay. Well, first off, I've worked on some elections over there in Ohio, where I was actually born in. I've worked on elections in Virginia. I was also part of the state convention for the Republican Party of Virginia. Although I could not vote, I openly endorsed a gentleman within the Attorney General primary. And so after that process was over with, I started helped the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general pass the finish line. And so it was amazing after that to have the lieutenant governor and governor come to Regent University to do the commencement speech for when I graduated. So it was just an awesome turn of events that just happened to have played out. It was a to be a part of that. And so, yeah, as I'm being told that Ohio now has a supermajority for the Republican Party. The Republicans did very well in North Carolina, one shy in the state house to get a supermajority. DeSantis over there in Florida did exceptionally well, having, I believe it to be a record number of votes and just massive milestone that he crossed. And so I will say this, before the election, of course, I even told you that I just did not see a Republican red wave. I just to be very truthful, I did not see that. And so I saw red splashes, but I also saw blue splashes along the way. I was never confident of Pennsylvania senatorial. I just was not. Pennsylvania, with Donald Trump, it was gold where Republicans have reached for. We could almost grab it, and then it slips through our fingers. So I knew from the get that Pennsylvania would be hardcore at best there. Being very familiar with the Beaver Falls, western area, my wife's family being on the eastern side of the state. And so I'm fairly familiar with that as well. So we had some red splashes, we had some blue splashes. And so just, rightly dividing those numbers going forwardly onward will be very interesting for a time getting rigged up, ready to roll for 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think you're right. I think Pennsylvania is one of those spots that always within grasp, but very quickly become in the rearview mirror because
yes,
the grasp once you reach is gone. You better grab it or it's gone. I think, and two, I don't know the kind of candidates that Pennsylvania puts out to challenge the Democrats. You really got to be astute to you got to have that right candidate. That's the blue collar candidate. Not the ivory tower candidate. And Republicans tend to put the appearance of the ivory tower candidate up there, even though they might not be. But it just, it's a very union. Yeah, Pennsylvania is very union.
Absolutely.
And
Pennsylvania is a very
big,
weird state. It comes in a nation, and where you have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh on the two ends of it being very Democrat, your Republicans is on the north, and it swivels in the middle there, and so Republicans don't do very well going in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia.
Pittsburgh, you got Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, you got Philadelphia, you got places, and then you got the other communities like Reading, and so when you hit those areas in Pottstown and those are heavy blue, and unfortunately, I do know a lot of people in Pennsylvania that are friends. I got some family there, but friends, and they're embarrassed by this vote.
Sure.
Because I'm still trying to figure out how you elect Uncle Fester from the Adams family. You know what I mean? That to me is the epitome of pure ignorance. That somebody who couldn't put a sentence together, and I'm making fun that he was sick. I'm making fun because they were lying about it. Yeah, that what to me that needs to be a malfeasance crime, and he should be charged with malfeasance in office because as lieutenant governor, he ran a campaign for Senate, and he was in office as a lieutenant governor, lying to the people about his competency. And the only way he was found out about it is because a reporter reported how bad it really was. Of course, they wanted to barbecue her over it. But to me, that's a form of malfeasance in office because he lied to the voters, his campaign staff, kind of like the Biden basement thing. Campaigning from the right. So when you campaign from the basement and you still can get elected, of course, people say, well, it was not a real election. Well, it may not be, but it's in the books as a real election.
Right.
And at the end of the day, that's what right, wrong, indifferent, lie, not lie, whatever. The fact is, if people don't have the faith in the election, then the election's a problem. And right now, but I think what's interesting now is when you look at Georgia and all these places where they thought the new voter laws were going to restrict people from voting, it brought more people out.
Right.
So that argument of, that it caused a problem is an invalid argument, but it's going to be used totally different. And, it's going to play off a whole new spin of how unfair it still was, but it allowed people to vote that they could have voted anyway, but it made it easier for them to do what it was they're doing at higher volumes, whatever that might be. So when you look at this and you take it and you go to the electorate, like people understand that, you get so many electorates from California, so many from Pennsylvania, so many from Texas, so many from all these was it Chicago, Illinois area. And by the time you load up this electorate across the country, and how many do you need to get elected as president, right? How many do you need to get elected? And that's the name of the game. So
right.
A lot of people understand that the reason they do that is because if you're in Nebraska or you're in Idaho or you're in places the middle way of the country, or any other place that's not really seen as a big viable option for a whole lot, is that you have an opportunity to be heard, that you still are going to be represented based on all that, because you still what's good for California is not necessarily good for Idaho, and what's good for
Amen.
Wisconsin is not going to be necessarily good for the state of Oregon. So you have to spread it out. So there is taxation with representation and not taxation without representation. And I think that's what we get away from when we talk about should the popular vote be the deciding factor, or should it be, at the end of the day, the delegates, which would lead into the term of having the electorates. Because at the end of the day is what we talk about in our Constitution is taxation without representation. And if you go by the popular vote, you have now solidified taxation without representation, because the people in the middle of the country will have no representation. So it is important that we have the system we do and not look at the popular vote as the guiding force. What are your thoughts on that?
If I'm for president, I could say Florida, let's say Texas, California, New York, and Pennsylvania. I could perhaps just become. So you take and in your last segment, discussing the Electoral College, and I am absolutely a first defender of the Electoral College. As a matter of fact, once I earlier, I was part of the Electoral College in 2020 here in North Carolina, representing the 1st Congressional District. And so when dealing with the Electoral College, you're absolutely right, Ricky. I don't want somebody from New York or California dictating what North Carolinian values should be. And so it's very important that we recognize how the founders broke this up. And so we do not vote for the president. We vote for the president's electors, and those electors go to the state capitol and they cast their votes. And 20 Carolina had 15 electoral votes, one for each congressional district, and every state has two representing the senatorial district representing the state. So every state gets two, plus whatever population they're allotted. I remember when I originally did research on this, I think it was back 2010, I think it was, because of a population being, I think it was 45 as a population, 45 people dictated that the North Carolinian Electoral College was allowed no longer 14, but 15. And in 2020, because of that census, we are now going into 16 for the 2024 election. And so we have a new congressional district. The maps will change again. And so that is how the Electoral College is broken down. Every state gets two, plus based off of your congressional districts. And so 270 is to win. However, in my lifetime, I would love to see a 269 versus 269, where it would go to the House and the Senate. And so on one of my videos explaining that in 2020, I went in depth on how to navigate through that process. And just when you and Pastor Earhart was discussing how the impeachment process is done, obviously the House of Representatives gets to charge the Senate to convict. And that time frame, if it is, let's say, the president over sharing of that body. So it's a process. I love procedure. I love process. And so it was an absolute blessing and privilege to be part of the Electoral College of 2020. And of course, again, North Carolina gained another elector, and so that brought 18 electoral votes for the 2024 election.
Well, I think too is when you look at that, legislator McCarthy now, whether he ends up with the votes, it don't look like he has the votes to be elected as the chair as of today. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Because if not, then who?
Yeah.
Who's going to challenge
if he
him?
does, it's done by plurality, certainly not by the majority. Exactly.
Right. Because he doesn't have. There's going to be there's a lot that's not going to go his way. That's for sure.
Right.
But the protocol in there, I guess they can get him in there anyway. They got enough to probably get him in there, but not the way they want him in there, I would think. I don't know. We'll see. It's going to be interesting about who actually would fit that mold, kind of like McConnell. I mean, Scott didn't have much of a challenge for him because I guess McConnell, nobody's going to go against the one who wields the money. But that's just the standard that the Democrats have too. So Pelosi did that and keep everybody in line. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, the Republicans don't follow any line. They're very independent of themselves.
Herding cats, yes.
I mean, bottom line is they're independent thinkers. Where on the left, they just follow wherever the farmer drops the corn. And as long as they get fed, they don't care how they get fed, as long as they get fed a lot.
Right.
So it's like the Democratic farm. Is the farmers taking care of the Democrats out on the farm. They don't care. He don't care how many bale hay he puts out there, or how much corn he feeds them with, or how much slop for the pigs out there goes out there. They don't care as long as these being fed come back and partake on what they're offering, what they're dishing out, so to speak. Because the Democrats do stay together. It doesn't matter who they put in. I always say this, and people are like, well, I can't believe you said that. They could put Attila the Hun, Joseph Stallings in there. If you put a Democrat by his name, the Democrats are going to vote for him. The end. Republicans don't do that. If they don't like the Republicans in there, they're not voting for them.
Right. Right.
And that makes the difference in the party. I think that's sometimes what makes the left a little bit stronger, is because they'll follow a truck into hell before they'll not side with the D.
Right.
They'll crash and burn first before they'll walk out and save the whole plane to vote for a Republican. And that's the way it is. And that's what makes them kind of very dangerous. But in the same sense, man, you look at it, you go, wow, at least their party's together. Might not be for the good purposes all the time, but at least it's together. So we don't always do that as Republicans or conservatives, because we do have our individual, kind of like when it comes to states' beliefs, states' rights versus the federal and all that. Whereas to the left would just assume that the federal come in and take over the states and push off their agenda of indoctrination to whatever it is they use. So it does make a difference, that's for sure. So, but so what are your thoughts in your process? Yeah, tell us about what have you accomplished? You've been doing a lot of schooling and different things, and what are you working toward right now?
Well, I actually come to a crossroads. With me being the county chair for over 10 years, I joined Gates County Republican Party of October of 2011. The very next month, we're marching in. Well, not next month, but 2 months later, we marched in the Christmas parade here in Gates County in Gatesville, and then it was just off and running. And so. Did 10 years here, did 2 years as a congressional district. Flipping the seats, I think my job is coming to a close on that. Although I don't mind helping out campaigns, it certainly will nowhere near be the level it used to. And so back when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I noticed that there was a gentleman that was running for president by the name of Pat Robertson. And even though I reserve the right to disagree with him on some issues, he did do a phenomenal job at building a college. And being 10 years old while he's on the campaign trail, I'm watching him. And so I said back then that was a school I wanted to go to. So graduating from the College of the Albemarle in Elizabeth City, Pasco County, and taking that 2-year degree, 100% of my credits transferred over to Regent.
To where?
Graduated with my
Where they transferred to? Where they transferred to? You were breaking up a little bit.
Okay, my apologies. So when I graduated from COE, which is College of the Albemarle over here in Elizabeth City, in the next county over, Pasco County, 100% of my credits was transferable to Regent University. And so at Regent University, I was able to graduate with my bachelor's degree. Now, in the state of Virginia, you do not have to go to law school to practice law. It's called reading the law. And so one of my options is to get a lawyer to sign off on me so I could practice law. And so that was one of my options for a hot minute. And I think law school is the best, because after further investigation, if I read the law in Virginia, yes, after 3 years of reciprocity, I could practice in North Carolina, but I could never run for judge. And so I think now is the time to go to Regent and just go to law school, unless there's something that happens within the next, let's say a couple months or so. But that's what I have, that I'm looking forward to, is going into their law school program and perhaps rather running for judge here in North Carolina, or perhaps even working for perhaps even the DOJ on a federal level. So that's what I'm looking at. That's what I'm looking at. I've done my time as a public servant. I've been in politics for 26 years. And so it's just time to look at other perspectives. So that's what I'm looking at. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you got your plate full, which I know you do. So
Yes,
there's no
sir.
doubt about that.
Yes,
And as always, I'll tell you, it's been an honor to have you here. I think it's been a great show tonight. I'm glad you were here, and we could share a few laughs and have a little conversation and stuff like that. And kind of see what's going on in different parts of North Carolina. And you, as always, you're invited to be a guest anytime that you've got some time. You want to come back and keep us updated. Let us know what's happening and what, any changes in your life, things like that. I mean, that's what our show is about. This is it's your America. That's what I tell everybody. I said, what's your show about? I said, it's about whatever you want it to be. It's your America. Make it yours. So it's kind of like we talk about what we want to talk about. We bring up things we want to talk about. The reality is as long as it's your America, you're free to talk about whatever you want to. And that's
Cool.
the kind of concept behind the show. It does not belong to the White House. It does not belong to the politicians. It doesn't belong to anybody but America. And that's the way it has to be, because that's who we are. So I do appreciate you coming by and stopping in. And folks, if you get a chance to see Thomas Hill and any other shows or podcasts, I think that's going to be a future for him. We're going to get him out there on the circuit a little bit, let him talk to some other show hosts and different things. I think there's a lot that voters don't understand about how we vote.
Right.
And how many times they go, when's the election? Well, election was last Friday or last Tuesday.
Right.
Well, I was going to vote for him. Well, unfortunately, in a primary, you don't always get notifications like you do in the general election. So it's kind of the primary and it's the off year vote. So anyway, we just got to do better. Try to educate the public, senior citizens sitting in. Makes it tough on them because they can't always get out. But they're a strong part of the vote, and they have a right to vote too. And I think we need to challenge people to step up and vote, and that can vote, to go take that opportunity to do it. That's who we are as a country. That's how we get our voices heard. We don't get our voices heard by going to battle, going to war, fighting each other at each corner, at each step, or
Right.
fighting our next door neighbors. We need our
Right.
voices heard at the polls, and we need to take that more seriously. And folks, as I always have said in the past, and I will continue to say, no matter what you do in life, you got to be safe, be real, and always, always be ready, because you never know when the wolf is knocking at your door. And don't forget to check out the pastor's book. And I'm going to let you know one more time on how to get that done. And y'all have a great evening, and check it out. The Emancipation Proclamation, as Tom says. I got the book. He's got the book. The pastor's got the book. Now the world too needs the book. Check it out, folks. It's a great read. I read it. I actually read it twice. It's worth the read. And again, be careful where you go, what you do, because you never know when the wolf is knocking at your door.
Amen.